lunar oceans that may house alien life, strange magnetic field changes scientists weren't expecting to see, and the discovery of active volcanoes on distant moons. Voyager 1 and 2 are space probes launched by NASA in 1977. After they flew past Neptune in 1989, their mission wasn't over. The spacecraft kept traveling beyond the planets, pushing further and further into our solar system. In 2012, Voyager 1 crossed into interstellar space, and Voyager 2 followed in 2018. This was a huge achievement because these were the first spacecraft to venture so far from Earth. Now, interstellar space isn't what most people think of as empty. It's actually filled with particles, atoms, molecules, and dust. As Voyager moved into this region, it faced some new challenges. One big one is cosmic rays. These are high-energy particles traveling nearly at the speed of light. As Jamie Rankin, a space physicist at Princeton, explained, on Earth, galactic cosmic rays are heavily shielded by the sun, but there are a lot more of those out there where the Voyagers are. End quote. These rays are dangerous because they could hit Voyager's electronics and fry them. Luckily, Voyager's computers are old, and that actually works in its favor. They're much larger than modern tech, so they're able to handle these cosmic rays a lot better. Even though Voyager 1 and 2 are far from home, they've still been sending back valuable data that we're going to be sharing with you today. Voyager made a groundbreaking discovery when it found evidence that two moons in the outer solar system, Europa, a moon of Jupiter, and Enceladus, a moon of Saturn, could have oceans beneath their icy surfaces. According to Carolyn Porco, a planetary scientist, it, quote, set the stage for the discovery that these worlds actually have liquid water oceans under their surfaces. These discoveries were crucial in guiding future missions to these moons. Cassini, a robotic spacecraft which explored Saturn and its moons, later found hydrothermal vents on Enceladus in 2017. And here's something really cool. Scientists think that these could be signs that life may exist there. According to American planetary scientist Linda Spilker, because thermal vents on Earth can have colonies of life, we wonder, perhaps, if there's also life in the oceans of these worlds. We will learn more in the near future. In 2024, NASA launched the Europa Clipper spacecraft to Europa to gather more data, but it won't land until April of 2030, so don't hold your breath. As I said at the top, as Voyager entered interstellar space, it started recording measurements that nobody had anticipated. One of the most surprising discoveries was the sudden spike in plasma density and magnetic field strength. Plasma is a state of matter made up of charged particles, and Voyager's instruments started to detect an increase in its density. Don Kurth, a member of the Voyager science team, said that the measurements, quote, suggest Voyager is exploring an unknown region of space, going on to explain that while scientists had expected the transition from solar wind to interstellar wind to be smooth, the data from Voyager pointed to something different, something more complex. Solar wind is the flow of charged particles from the sun that fills the solar system. It creates a sort of bubble around the sun called the heliosphere, and this stream of particles is what Earth and other planets experience all the time. But once you move past the outer edges of this bubble, things start to change. The spacecraft's data showed spikes in plasma density and shifts in magnetic fields, meaning Voyager was encountering something new. Instead of a clear transition, it was moving into a region where interstellar medium, the material that exists between stars, was mixing with the solar wind. The interstellar medium is made of gases and tiny particles, but it's much thinner than the solar wind, so this mix of solar wind and interstellar material created a more complex environment than scientists had expected. In 1979, Voyager 1 made a groundbreaking discovery when it passed Jupiter and its moons. The spacecraft provided the first ever close-up images of Io, one of Jupiter's largest moons. To scientists' surprise, these images revealed that Io was not a quiet, frozen moon like many others in the solar system. Instead, was incredibly active. Voyager captured images of volcanic eruptions, with plumes of gas and molten lava shooting up into the sky, but the volcanoes on Io aren't like the ones we have here at home. They don't erupt with lava flows and ash clouds as much. Instead, they're mostly made up of sulfur and sulfur dioxide, and some of these volcanoes are so powerful that they shoot material all the way up into space. The images showed a surface covered in lava lakes and volcanic pits. This was a big discovery because unlike most moons, Io wasn't just a cold, dead rock. It had heat inside and was and is still changing. This is mostly because of Jupiter's huge gravity, which pulls on Io as it orbits. That constant squeezing and stretching creates enough heat to fuel its volcanoes. Voyager 1 and 2 also learned something else about Jupiter, that it actually has rings. Sure, that's common knowledge now, but before the Voyagers showed up, Jupiter's rings were completely unknown. The Voyager probes discovered that the planet's ring system was faint and made up of small particles, much smaller than the ones that make up Saturn's more famous rings. Jupiter's rings are composed mostly of dust particles. They're much harder to see than Saturn's, which is why they hadn't been noticed by telescopes before. Jupiter's rings were confirmed to have three main components. There's a thin inner ring made up of dark particles that reflect light, and then there's two outer rings, which are made up of more diffuse dust particles. In late 2020, a helicopter crew flying over the Utah desert spotted something strange sticking out of the ground, a tall, shiny metal slab. It was basically the monolith from 2001: A Space Odyssey. It didn't look like it had crashed there. Someone, or possibly something, planted it there deliberately. The Utah Department of Public Safety posted photos online but didn't say where it was. They were worried too many people would show up. But that didn't stop the internet. A Reddit user named Tim Slane figured out the exact location using Google Earth, and even narrowed down the time frame of when it first appeared, sometime between 2015 and 2016. Once the internet caught on, people made the trip out to see it. Then, just like that, it vanished. A group of guys eventually claimed they removed it to protect the environment, but that didn't explain where it came from originally or why it was there for years without anyone noticing. Was this an art piece, or was there something else going on? No one really knows. Across the Namib Desert are thousands of strange circles, each one ringed with short grass, but totally empty in the middle. And nothing grows inside them. Even if you water and fertilize the soil, it just stays dead. These things stretch for nearly 1,800 kilometers, and no one really knows what causes them. Some scientists think termites are creating them from underground. Others think they might be caused by toxic plants, gas leaks, or just animals rolling around in the sand. That last one doesn't really explain nothing being able to grow in the circles. The other weird part is how uniform they are. The circles don't overlap, and some researchers believe there has to be some kind of system or pattern behind where they appear. They can be as small as 6.5 feet or 2 meters across, or as wide as 65 feet or 20 meters. And they last for decades, sometimes 70 years, before they suddenly vanish and new ones form somewhere else. The biggest cluster is in Namibia, but similar patterns have started showing up as far south as Cape Province in South Africa. Locals have come up with legends to explain them, calling them footprints of the gods. Whatever's going on, it's happening on a huge scale and across very harsh, dry terrain. Fairy circles don't leave behind much evidence when they fade away, so tracking how or why they form is tough. Right now, they're still one of the strangest natural mysteries in any desert on the planet. Scattered across a stretch of desert between Libya and Egypt is a weird natural glass that looks like pale yellow gemstones. Some pieces are small and sharp, others are big and smooth. It's called Libyan desert glass. It's made almost entirely of silica. Scientists say it formed around 29 million years ago, but no one fully agrees on how. The leading theory is that a giant space rock either hit the ground or exploded just above it, unleashing so much heat that it melted the sand into glass. That kind of blast would have been way more powerful than any nuclear bomb, and you could see the results baked into the landscape. Some fragments also contain redite, a mineral that only forms under insane pressure, like what happens during a meteor impact. So that detail basically rules out the idea that it was caused by anything other than a direct hit. Archaeologists have found ancient tools made from the glass, and there's even a piece carved into a scarab in King Tut's tomb. But seeing it sitting in the desert sand, it really does look like some kind of alien planet.
Between 200 to 400 meters down, where sunlight fades, researchers found bacteria struggling. Not because of lack of food, but because of lack of iron. A study in 2024 in the Pacific found that in the so-called Twilight zone, which is about 200 to 1,000 meters, iron concentrations were extremely low. Bacteria there secrete molecules to grab iron, even though light is absent. This overturns assumptions that microbial life in that zone operates in the same way as near-surface waters. It also changes how we think about carbon cycling, because these microbes help break down organic matter, which affects how carbon is stored in the deep ocean. So something tiny like iron deficiency has global implications. Scientists discovered that the deep ocean floor can produce oxygen, even in total darkness, without sunlight, without plants. That flips a major assumption on its head. In the Clarion-Clipperton zone in the Pacific, polymetallic nodules, those potato-sized rocks loaded with metals, were found to generate oxygen via a geochemical process, perhaps electrolysis driven by natural voltages on the sea floor. The idea that rocks, not plants, might produce oxygen at 4,000 meter depths blows up the textbook. If oxygen can form this way, maybe we've been underestimating where aerobic life could exist, even on other worlds. It also challenges assumptions of how the deep ocean cycles nutrients and supports life. Under 200 meters of ice, scientists found what looks like a city of fish nests. In the Weddell Sea off Antarctica, beneath an ice shelf that has long hidden the sea floor, researchers discovered more than 1,000 circular nests of the fish species yellowfin nodi. These weren't scattered randomly. They were arranged in sweeping curves and clusters, like neighborhoods on the sea floor. The nests were cleared of detritus and organized, suggesting the fish built them intentionally for the protection of eggs and community benefit. We assumed these parts of the Antarctic sea floor were barren or simple. Instead, we find complex, organized animal behavior in one of the harshest climates on the planet. It definitely strengthens the case to protect these regions. Bigger than a blue whale and visible from space, a massive coral colony that had been quietly growing for centuries was finally brought to light. In late 2024, scientists from National Geographic Pristine Seas discovered in the Solomon Islands a solitary coral of the species Pavona clavis, measuring about 34 meters wide, 32 meters long, and over 5 meters high. Researchers estimated its age to be between 300 and 500 years old, making it one of the oldest living organisms on the planet. What's even more incredible is how it survived centuries of storms, warming seas, and human activity. This discovery reveals that some coral species may have hidden refuges in deeper, cooler waters, potential safe havens against climate change. It also shows that life in the ocean can grow larger, older, and more resilient than anyone expected.
We're starting things off with the case of the ping. So reports of strange sounds, often described as whistles, hums, or pings, have been documented in the Arctic. And one of the most famous cases involving a strange sound is the Arctic ping. Back in the summer of 2016, in a small Inuit hamlet called Igloolik in Nunavut, hunters started getting concerned about a strange ping noise coming from the Fury and Hecla Strait, which is a channel of water about 75 miles northwest of Igloolik. Now, the hunters' primary concern wasn't just how bizarre the sound was and the fact that they couldn't identify it, but the fact that it seemed to be scaring away the sea mammals in the area that they depend on. The sound seemed to be coming from the sea floor, and this wasn't just a few residents reporting the sound either. This was a big enough deal that the military was actually sent in to investigate, but they didn't find anything. One theory is that members of Greenpeace were somehow involved, creating the sound in order to scare off the animals from the hunters, but there's never been any definitive proof of that hypothesis. Next up, we have the Arctic UAPs. So just like with any remote area, the Arctic has its fair share of reported UFO sightings, and now some of these can be attributed to military activity or just misidentification of natural things, but some are still very much unexplained, and one of the biggest stories to come out recently is back in February of 2023 when all those UAPs were shot down over a bunch of different airspaces, mostly in Canada and the United States. News Nation just recently followed up on this story, saying that there were various sources claiming that there was a previously undisclosed encounter, 8 or 9 other UAPs, and this was right over the Arctic Circle. This was on February 1st, just a few days before the main objects had been shot down. Fighter jets were sent up from NORAD to engage with the objects, but the UAPs flew off at high speed, and no, they still aren't sure what these things were, unless they're just hiding that info from the public. Either way, it's pretty eerie stuff. Next up on the list, we have a very alarming discovery of viruses. Scientists have come across viruses like the Mola virus, for example, in the permafrost of the Arctic Circle. Permafrost is permanently frozen soil, and as it thaws, it exposes ancient layers, some of which contain ancient viruses. Mola virus is a type of giant virus, and the fact that viruses can linger deep within the ice, lying dormant for thousands of years and then unleash themselves on the world when they're thawed out, is a pretty freaky idea. Luckily, there haven't been any discovered so far that pose a serious threat to humans, but that doesn't mean that more potentially deadly ancient viruses won't rear their ugly head and become active as more permafrost starts to thaw. Who knows what could be locked away under there. If you are enjoying our channel so far, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button and leave your thoughts and comments down in the comments below. So speaking of these dormant viruses breaking free from melting Arctic ice, we have the very creepy case of the Siberian anthrax outbreak in 2016. And so unlike the dormant ancient viruses that I talked about before, this actually did affect human beings. Apparently this was caused by a heat wave thawed a 75-year-old reindeer carcass that had been infected with anthrax. The thawing process released dormant spores of the bacteria responsible for anthrax into the surrounding environment. The spores contaminated the soil and water sources nearby, and then local reindeer that were grazing on the contaminated land, of course, came into contact with these anthrax spores. Over 2,300 reindeer were infected. This then led to humans getting infected when they consumed the contaminated reindeer meat. About 100 people were hospitalized with anthrax exposure. One person even lost their life. So yeah, this was pretty freaky. Could have been much worse, but freaky nonetheless. Anthrax really is no joke. Just goes to show like how insidious dormant bacteria really is. So Greenland sharks are one of the largest shark species. They can grow to lengths of 24 feet, sometimes more. That's a big shark. You don't need me to tell you why that's scary. Now, here's something that I could not believe about these things. Greenland sharks have a very long lifespan. And when I say long, I mean like long. Again, I read this and was shocked. They live between 250 to 500 years. 500! That means there could be a Greenland shark swimming around up in the North Pole right now that's been alive since the 16th century, just a handful of years after the Middle Ages. Blows my mind. These sharks have a bit of a creepy look to them as well, with a thick, robust body, a rounded snout, dark gray or black in color. Their eyes also have this pale, almost zombie kind of look to them. These are apex predators, their diet consisting of fish, seals, and other marine animals, and they live deep under the water at depths of around 650 to 3,000 feet, and they've been recorded even deeper than that. In the 1930s, German archaeologists uncovered a clay jar near Baghdad. Inside was a copper cylinder and an iron rod. When filled with an acidic solution, it produces a small electric charge. This object dates back nearly 2,000 years though. known as the Baghdad battery. It demonstrates a basic understanding of electrochemistry long before electricity was thought to exist. Museums acknowledge that the Baghdad battery exists, of course, but they refuse to label it as a battery. Instead, they suggest it may have been a scroll holder or ritual object. Repeated experiments show it generates electricity. In the late 20th century, sonar surveys off the coast of Japan revealed a massive stone structure beneath the ocean near Yonaguni Island. Divers documented step terraces, sharp right angles, massive stone platforms, and what appeared to be carved staircases. Some blocks weigh thousands of tons. The structure sits over 80 feet underwater. Geological dating suggests it was above sea level more than 10,000 years ago. That would place its construction before the accepted rise of civilization. Museums refuse to classify it as man-made. They acknowledge the formation exists, but say it could be just natural erosion. Despite all the flat plains, the straight edges, the consistent angles, independent geologists argue the structure shows clear signs of this being shaped by tools. Museums will not engage though. As a result, the site remains in limbo. In the early 1900s, archaeologist Henry Fairfield Osborne examined a fossilized human footprint alongside prehistoric animal tracks in Nevada. The footprint appeared in the same geological layer as extinct Ice Age animals. If accurate, it would mean humans existed far earlier than accepted timelines. Museums rejected the finding. They labeled the footprint a natural formation, and no further analysis was permitted. The moment this discovery was analyzed, it threatened to break the human timeline in half. In 1866, miners digging a tunnel through Table Mountain in California uncovered a human jawbone buried deep beneath layers of volcanic basalt. Rock above it had been formed by lava flows dated to over 9 million years ago. This was not loose soil. The jawbone was sealed beneath solid volcanic rock, meaning it had been there before the lava hardened. The bone was sent to Harvard University and examined by Dr. J.D. Whitney, the state geologist of California. After studying the surrounding geology, Whitney concluded the jawbone was genuinely ancient and could not have been introduced later. If that conclusion were accepted, it would place humans in North America millions of years before current models allow. Museums immediately rejected the finding. Rather than disproving the geology, institutions labeled the jawbone a hoax or a misplaced modern bone, despite no evidence of intrusion. Basalt layers showed no cracks or disturbances. The mining tunnel had been sealed since its creation. Eventually, the discovery was removed from official publications. The specimen itself has vanished. The discovery was never proven false. It was just erased.
If you want to see what the past really looks like, do not go to a museum of statues. Go to a bog. In 1950, peat cutters in Denmark were working in a bog when they uncovered a human body buried deep in the peat. The preservation was so intense that authorities initially treated it like a recent case, but it was not recent. The man had died in the Iron Age more than 2,000 years ago. He became known as Tulland Man. Bog conditions can preserve human tissue in a way that feels almost unfair. Skin, facial features, even subtle expressions can survive. It is deeply unsettling because your brain expects ancient remains to be anonymous, and Tulland Man is not anonymous. He looks like someone you could pass on the street, except he is separated from you by centuries. And the remoteness matters. Bogs are quiet, isolated places. The kind of place where someone could be brought, left, and then sealed away by nature, not hidden by a criminal mastermind. Hidden by chemistry. If you find a cave painting of a deer, that is cool. If you find thousands of figures, including headless beings, in one of the most remote deserts on Earth, that is something else. In Egypt's western desert, near the Gilf Kebir Plateau, there is a rock shelter known as the Cave of Beasts. It was discovered in 2002 in a region that is unbelievably isolated, near borders and far from modern settlements. Inside are thousands of prehistoric paintings, more than 7,000 years old, including hand stencils, human figures, and strange headless creature-like forms that researchers describe as unique. The Sahara today is harsh and dry, but when this art was made, the region had a wetter climate with lakes and life. What makes it disturbing is the vibe. This is not a simple "we hunted animals" art wall. It looks symbolic, ritual, and frankly a little uncanny. You are standing in a cave in the middle of nowhere, staring at the imagination of people who lived before written history, and they chose to paint things that still look alien. One day it is a flat tundra. The next day, there is a massive crater where the ground used to be. In 2014, a huge crater was spotted on the Yamal Peninsula in northern Russia, a remote region of permafrost and extreme conditions. The images went viral because it looked impossible, like something punched the earth from below. Scientists investigated and focused on gas pressure and permafrost dynamics. Early reporting in Nature described it likely linked to methane release in thawing permafrost. Later, peer-reviewed work explored mechanisms involving pressure buildup and collapse of icy ground structures, basically the Earth forming a sealed chamber, pressurizing, then failing. The disturbing element here is that it is not a one-off. Multiple similar craters have been documented in the region tied to permafrost behavior and gas. So the tundra is not just melting quietly. In rare cases, it can fail violently and suddenly. It's the kind of discovery that makes you realize remote landscapes are not static. They are active systems, and sometimes they change fast enough to scare the people who live there. This discovery is disturbing for one simple reason: it does not look ancient. In 2007, reindeer herders in Russia's Arctic found a woolly mammoth calf preserved in permafrost. The calf became known as Luba. She was so well preserved that scientists could study her body in exceptional detail, including tissues that normally decay long before anyone can examine them. National Geographic covered Luba as a near-perfect frozen mammoth that could reveal clues about mammoth life and extinction. The preservation was not just bones. It was like the Ice Age had mailed the modern world a package still cold. The disturbing part is the intimacy. It is one thing to hear mammoths existed. It is another to look at a preserved animal and think this was a living being, and the gap between then and now suddenly feels thin, like time is not a wall, it's just a layer of ice that can melt. If you crash land on a remote ice cap and survive, you kind of assume the story ends there, but sometimes the ice keeps the story and returns it decades later. In July 1942, during World War II, ferry operations, a group of aircraft had to make emergency landings on Greenland's ice after running into severe weather. All crew members survived and were eventually rescued, but the planes were left behind, and over time, they were buried under accumulating snow and ice. One of those planes was Lockheed P-38 that became famously known as Glacier Girl. After years of searching and engineering headaches, recovery teams brought it up from deep ice in 1992. Smithsonian coverage describes the effort as an audacious recovery project, pulling a warplane out of the Greenland ice sheet after about 50 years entombed. The disturbing part is how cleanly the ice can erase evidence of human history. A whole squadron can vanish into a white landscape with no wreckage field, no smoke, no marker, just silence until technology catches up and the ice finally gives it back.
In Germany, archaeologists digging in the Steinacker region discovered way more than they were expecting. Originally, they'd been setting out to find a rumored Roman estate, but instead, they discovered ruins of a Roman highway stretching over 1/4 of a mile and a village with several buildings and artifacts. The road likely connected to 2 Roman forts about 6 miles apart. In terms of artifacts, they found fragments of wall paintings, found coins, a stone statue. The statue, identified as Mercury, the god of traders and merchants. Archaeologists believe the statue came from a temple dedicated to Mercury, showing just how important he was to the Romans, especially those involved in trade, of course. The village would have been a rest stop, craft center, a small trading post that probably popped up around 100 CE and was abandoned by 300 CE. The Nazca lines have been talked about to death, but today we have an update for you. Recently, hundreds of new geoglyphs in the desert of southern Peru have been found with the help of artificial intelligence. There you go, it is good for some things. Researchers using AI to analyze satellite images discovered 303 additional geoglyphs in just 6 months. These include detailed depictions of animals like llamas and orcas holding weapons, more on that later, along with more human-like figures. Some of these things are over 2,000 years old, created by the Nazca people, who lived between 200 BCE and 600 CE. They're famous for their massive drawings etched into the desert floor, which could only have been fully appreciated from the air, which makes them very mysterious. So the AI model was key in this discovery. As lead author Masato Sakai explained, the quote, traditional method of study was slow and carried the risk of overlooking some of them. The AI, on the other hand, found faint lines 20 times faster than humans could. Now they were able to map out the distribution of the geoglyphs a lot more efficiently. say the least. Some of these new figures are smaller, but even older than the previously known ones. The images include orcas holding blades, a symbol linked to human sacrifice. As Sakai pointed out, on some pottery from the Nazca period, there are scenes depicting orcas with blades cutting off human heads. Now, we're still not sure what the purpose of the Nazca lines was, but it seems like they would have held some spiritual significance. This year, archaeologists working in Pompeii discovered something pretty cool: a private spa complex, no longer operational of course, but it is helping to show us how the city's wealthy lived before Mount Vesuvius erupted and buried everyone in mounds of boiling hot lava. How's that for a hot tub? The spa complex was found during excavations of a home in what was once a wealthy district of Pompeii. This would have been a place for the elite to unwind and socialize. The spa had different rooms, including a hot bath, a cold bath, and a steam room, all beautifully detailed. Plus, the site shows how advanced Roman engineering with its plumbing and heating systems was. For years, scholars weren't sure what animal represented Seth, the Egyptian god of disorder, sexuality, and death. When we picture animals in ancient Egypt, cats come to mind a lot, crocodiles, of course, eagles, snakes, beetles. These animals were often used to represent various gods and goddesses, but Seth's unusual form in ancient art was a strange creature with this long snout, pointy ears, and a tail. People have never really been sure what animal Seth was supposed to be. Some thought he may not have been based on an animal at all, even. But recently, archaeologist Pierre de Mare thinks he may have figured this out. After studying early depictions of Seth from between 4000 and 3000 BCE, he believes the animal was actually an aardvark. Not an animal we usually associate with ancient Egypt, but the aardvark's long ears, the snout and tail, they do match some of the earliest images of Seth. And de Mare also pointed out that people in sub-Saharan Africa have long associated aardvarks with themes like male virility and death, the same traits the god of Seth were associated with. Now, aardvarks don't live in the Nile Valley today, but animals like giraffes and elephants used to, so it is possible that aardvarks could have as well. Just recently, a team of researchers discovered prehistoric cave paintings in Indonesia that are among the oldest known to date. The paintings depict animals and human figures, important evidence of early human art in Southeast Asia. The cave paintings, which are estimated to be over 45,000 years old, give us a glimpse into the lives of our prehistoric ancestors. The artwork includes animals like pigs and buffalo, and human figures performing what look like rituals and hunting scenes. It's pretty amazing, because it shows that early humans in Southeast Asia were creating sophisticated art long before the rise of major civilizations. In 2011, archaeologists digging in the desert in northern Kenya found something that didn't match the timeline. And what do I mean by that? Well, they found all these stone tools, sharp chipped rocks that were clearly shaped by hand, but the tools were over 3 million years old. That's way older than the earliest known human remains, which only go back about 195,000 years. So who or what exactly made these tools? That's the mystery. Whoever did it wasn't one of us, meaning not Homo sapiens, and probably not even a direct ancestor. It had to be a different kind of hominin entirely. Maybe something we haven't even discovered yet. They picked the right kind of stone, used another rock to shape it. That takes some planning and precision. The location near Lake Turkana is nowhere near where the oldest known humans were found either, so this opens up a lot of questions about early human-like species and how widespread they might have been. Researchers are still trying to piece together what kind of creature could have pulled this off, but so far, no clear answers. In 2020, researchers found a strange greenish meteorite out in the Algerian Sahara. It looked like a regular chunk of space rock, but once they analyzed it, it turned out to be something way bigger. This thing, now called Erg-Chek O2, is volcanic, meaning it came from the crust of an ancient proto-planet. And it's old, like older than Earth, over 4 billion years. It came from the outer layer of a planet that formed, had lava, cooled down, and then got smashed apart. This is one of the only times we've found a rock that lets us study early planet crust. What you're looking at here is a piece of dead planet that flew through space before being buried in the desert for billions of years. Imagine getting to hold the surface of a lost planet in your hand. Amazing. The Hapatia stone was found in Egypt in 1996. At first, scientists thought it might be a meteorite. Some said it itself. In 2005, archaeologists working in Egypt's Valley of the Kings made a strange discovery. Just 15 feet away from King Tut's tomb was another sealed chamber made entirely from limestone. Inside were 28 large clay jars and 7 painted wooden coffins. Everything looked like your typical burial setup until they opened the sarcophagi. There were no bodies, not even any inscriptions, no signs of who this was meant for. Instead, each coffin was just filled with dirt, bits of clay, scraps of wood, pieces of fabric, and chunks of natron, the same substance Egyptians used to dry out mummies. In India's Thar Desert near a village called Boa, researchers recently found a bunch of enormous geometric patterns carved into the desert sand. They weren't spotted from the ground. These lines only came to light in 2021 thanks to satellite images. What they found was massive spirals, loops, and long parallel lines stretching over 48 kilometers, or about 30 miles. One spiral alone measures over 7 kilometers. The patterns are shallow, only about 10 centimeters deep and up to a half-meter wide, but they're incredibly precise and they're bigger than the famous Nazca lines in Peru. They're thought to be around 150 years old, possibly created in the late 1800s. But back then, there was no way anyone could view them from above. The geoglyphs are laid out around some old stone memorials known as chatris, which honor the dead, and that's led some to think they probably have some spiritual purpose. Still, no one really knows who made them. There are no local legends about them. No tools or construction clues have turned up either. Out in the Sahara, there's a place called Nabta Playa. It's basically like an ancient version of Stonehenge, only older. Way older. We're talking over 6,000 years ago, at least 1,000 years before Stonehenge was even a thing. The site has huge standing stones, some over 2.5 meters tall, arranged in a circle with several rows of flat slabs nearby. Some of the stones line up with the summer solstice, and others may have marked the rainy season, which makes sense since the place used to sit right on the edge of a seasonal lake. No one really knows who built it. Whoever they were, they lived during the Stone Age and clearly knew what they were doing. Archaeologists found cattle bones and some everyday tools at the site, which might mean the place was used for rituals, but we've never found any human remains here. It looks like this was more for astronomy, tracking the sun, maybe even the stars. Professor J. McKim Malville, who studies ancient astronomy, said it's one of the first clear signs of humans trying to understand the sky. And this all happened long before the rise of ancient Egypt. Deep in western Sahara's deserts are hundreds of mysterious stone formations, and no one's quite sure what they're for or when they were built. Archaeologists using field surveys and satellite images between 2002 and 2009 documented these shapes, but detailed digs haven't really happened much. A few burial mounds have been dated to around 1,500 years ago, and rock art nearby shows cattle, giraffes, oryx. Much of the site hasn't been explored though. Ongoing conflict and security threats have made fieldwork extremely risky. These stone formations are pretty intricate though. One of them stretches over 600 meters or nearly 2,000 feet with circles, lines, rock piles all laid out together. A lot of people think they might be graves, but without any artifacts to actually date them, it's mostly just speculation at this point. When Voyager 2 flew past Uranus in 1986, one of the spacecraft's biggest discoveries had to do with the planet's magnetic field. It found that Uranus's magnetic field wasn't like any other planet in the solar system, including Earth's. Instead of being aligned with the planet's axis of rotation like Earth's field, Uranus's magnetic field is tilted at an angle of 59 degrees to its rotation axis. This means that Uranus's magnetic field is extremely unusual. It creates a highly unpredictable environment for the planet's magnetosphere. A magnetosphere is the region around a planet controlled by its magnetic field, protecting it from stuff like solar radiation. Voyager Voyager 2's data also showed that the magnetic field of Uranus is also off-center. It doesn't originate from the planet's core, instead it comes from a spot deeper inside the planet. It seems that the planet's interior was a lot more complex than scientists had thought before. The magnetic field is also asymmetric, meaning that the planet's two hemispheres have vastly different magnetic properties. Understanding how Uranus's magnetic field operates also gave scientists some clues as to how other planets like Neptune might generate their own magnetic fields. In 1989, Voyager 2 made a pretty cool discovery as it flew by Neptune. The spacecraft's instruments showed an enormous storm system on the planet's surface, which was later named the Great Dark Spot. This storm, similar in appearance to Jupiter's Great Red Spot, was a dark, circular cloud system that was swirling in Neptune's atmosphere, and it was massive, about the same size as Earth. It was a raging storm with high-speed winds and a very deep dark blue color. The discovery was pretty fascinating because it showed that Neptune, a planet so far from the Sun, had weather systems that were incredibly active. This storm system helped confirm that Neptune's atmosphere was not just a calm, cold environment, but a place with complex weather patterns that could even rival those on Earth. But when astronomers took a look at Neptune again in the 90s with the Hubble Space Telescope, the Great Dark Spot had disappeared. Voyager 1 and 2 also helped discover several new moons orbiting Jupiter. Before the Voyager missions, Jupiter had only been known to have a handful of moons, but during their journeys, the spacecraft discovered 3 previously unknown moons that were orbiting very close to the planet. These moons were later named Adraste, Metis, and Thebe. Adraste is the smallest of the 3 and orbits just above Jupiter's inner ring. Metis is found just inside the orbit of Adraste and is slightly larger. Thebe, on the other hand, is farther from Jupiter and is shaped more irregularly than the other 2 moons. The fact that these moons orbit so close to the planet might mean they were captured by Jupiter's strong gravity rather than formed by the planet's own disk. And the more we learn about how things like moons form, the further we're able to get an understanding of the history and evolution of our solar system, and maybe even how planets and moons form in other systems. One of the most exciting discoveries made by Voyager 1 was the detection of an atmosphere around Saturn's moon Titan. Titan is the second largest moon in the solar system, and what made it especially interesting to scientists was the discovery that it has a thick atmosphere, unlike any other moon in the solar system. Voyager 1, during its flyby of Saturn in 1980, discovered that Titan's atmosphere is mostly composed of nitrogen, with traces of methane and other gases. The atmosphere was very dense, even more than Earth's, which raised a lot of questions about what was happening on Titan's surface. Scientists knew that Titan was too cold for liquid water to exist, but the thick atmosphere and the presence of methane could mean that there are other forms of chemistry at play here. The mix of nitrogen and methane could mean that the conditions on Titan might be similar to what Earth had before life began. This discovery set the stage for future missions, including the Cassini-Huygens mission, which would later land a probe on Titan's surface in 2005. It also got scientists talking about the idea that Titan could potentially host some form of life, though very different from anything seen on Earth. One of the most remarkable things about the Voyager craft is how long they've been operating. Launched in 1977, the spacecraft were never meant to last this long. In fact, they were only designed to operate for about 5 years. But despite being nearly 50 years old, both Voyagers are still sending back valuable data from over 15 billion miles away from Earth. The technology aboard the Voyagers was cutting edge in the 70s, but by today's standards, it's incredibly outdated. But this old technology has actually worked in their favor. Again, the spacecraft were built with bulky, durable materials, so they're better at withstanding damage from the harsh environment of space compared to newer, more delicate technology. Alan Cummings, not the actor, a physicist and longtime member of the Voyager team, pointed out that the spacecraft's larger and more rugged systems are better equipped to survive the intense radiation of interstellar space. So they're still kicking, but they won't last forever. Eventually, they'll stop sending data and will disappear into the vast reaches of space, lost like tears in rain.
Sponge that traps prey like a little death ball was found deep under the Southern Ocean, and dozens of other new species joined it. In August 2025, the Ocean Census Workshop confirmed 30 new species from remote Southern Ocean areas. One of them, a spherical predatory sponge covered in hooks used to trap prey. Sponges are usually passive filter feeders. This one is actively predatory. This deep region remains profoundly undersampled, as stated by scientists. It tells us that even in places already explored, we're still finding major life history surprises. In one of Earth's most extreme places, scientists found a creature built to kill. The discovery was an amphipod species. Dulcibella camanchaca was formally described in 2024 and 2025. It lives around 8,000 meters in the Atacama Trench near Chile. This little critter is not your average scavenger. It's built with appendages suited to capture prey, living in an environment where most life is assumed to be slow, sparse, and passive. The fact it thrives that deep and hunts actively changes how we see life at depth. It means complex predator-prey systems can exist even in the darkest, highest pressure places. It also raises questions about deep-sea biodiversity and how much more is out there. A ship that sailed hundreds of years ago lies at a depth humans rarely reach, and its discovery rewrites maritime archaeology underwater. In March 2025, the French Navy found a 16th century merchant shipwreck, provisionally called Camarat 4, more than 2,500 meters deep off the coast of France. The ship is 30 meters long, well preserved, equipped with cannons, empty stern, raising questions about cargo, route, why it sank. Archaeology under deep water is extremely hard, yet this find shows that deep-sea sites hold well-preserved time capsules of human history. It opens up new dimensions of underwater discovery beyond biology or geology. At nearly 10,000 meters depth, where pressure is crushing and sunlight non-existent, life not only exists, but thrives. A 2025 expedition to the Kuril-Kamchata Trench and nearby trenches found tube worms, mollusks, and other fauna at over 31,000 feet, which is around 9,500 meters. This challenges the prevailing view that only microbes or extremely sparse life can live that deep. Instead, we see ecosystems that appear more substantial. It broadens the depth range where we expect ecosystem activity and forces us to rethink how biological energy systems operate at extreme depths, feeding off carbon, seepage, microbes, not sunlight. Hundreds of creatures we've never seen are now known, and they're hiding in plain sight beneath the waves. In one of the largest biological surveys in ocean history, the collaborative Nippon Foundation Nekton Ocean Census announced 866 new marine species identified from undersampled regions around the world. Among them were translucent worms, sponge-like organisms with never-before-seen body structures, and even small crustaceans adapted to pressures that would crush metal. The discoveries came from both the deepest trenches and shallow coastal zones that scientists had simply never really cataloged before. These finds prove that we've barely scratched the surface of ocean life. Experts estimate that as much as 80% of marine species remain undiscovered, meaning that every new expedition could rewrite what we think we know about biodiversity on Earth.
Next on the list is radioactive fallout. So in the 50s and 60s, a lot of nuclear testing took place, and this released a lot of radioactive material into the atmosphere. These tests, which were conducted both above and below ground, led to the dispersal of radioactive particles over long distances, and the Arctic region, even though it was far away from the primary testing sites, ended up accumulating a lot of this fallout, which was transported there through precipitation patterns before finally settling in the ice and snow. The fallout included caesium-137 and strontium-90, which stay radioactive for long periods of time, and they contaminated soil, water, and wildlife. And just like with those pesky viruses, as Arctic ice melts, there are concerns about these radioactive particles getting re-released, redistributing the fallout, and affecting local populations and wildlife. Negatively, of course. You know what's creepy? Corpses. Dead stuff. It's just icky. Ever thought of that? Yeah, this is very enlightening information I'm sharing with you right now. Well, even creepier are old but very well preserved corpses. Mummies. Well, the Arctic ice is a perfect environment for keeping corpses nice and cool, and that's why mummies are found in this part of the world all the time. In one case, in Greenland, the Arctic environment preserved all these mummified bodies, which dated back between 1475 and 1635. These human remains were found in burial sites, and the cold, dry conditions of the Arctic led to the natural mummification process. There have also been several remains of the crew of the doomed Franklin expedition dug up over the years. They look pretty freaky. I mean, if zombies actually started rising up from their graves, they'd basically look like these mummies, depending when they died, anyway. Next, we have the discovery of crashed planes from World War II. There have been a number of World War II planes found buried under Arctic ice over the years. Take one case in 1992, for example. During World War II, a P-38 Lightning fighter aircraft and two B-17 Flying Fortress bombers were part of the Lost Squadron, which encountered a blizzard while supporting the Allied war effort in the British Isles. Because of severe weather conditions, the aircraft were forced to make an emergency landing on the glaciers of Greenland in 1942. All the crew members did survive the emergency landing, but they had to endure very harsh conditions on the ice for 9 whole days before finally being rescued. The aircrafts, though, were left behind on the glacier. Over the following decades, the shifting ice sheets of Greenland gradually buried the planes under about 250 to 300 feet of ice. But then in 1992, one of the P-38 Lightning fighters was successfully extracted from the ice. This aircraft became known as Glacier Girl, and remarkably, despite being encased in ice for like half a century, the P-38 was actually restored to flying condition. Next on the list are Arctic sea ice circles. NASA scientists, during the Operation Icebridge mission over the Beaufort Sea in the Arctic, observed 3 holes in the sea ice surrounded by irregular circular shapes. It's still not entirely known what causes these circles, but some possibilities are seals or whales creating the holes, allowing water to flow out and from the circular shapes, or warm water bubbling up from below. These strange holes appear in an area of young, thin ice that was recently open water, with wave-like ripples on its surface. Arctic sea ice is composed of both multi-year and seasonal ice and has been diminishing and thinning over the years, particularly, as you can imagine, in the summer. The Arctic seems to be warming at twice the global average rate. Some scientists are predicting that the Arctic could be almost ice-free in the summer by the 2040s. Finally, though, we have the release of methane. We talked about ancient viruses thawing out of the permafrost earlier in the video, but that's not the only concerning thing concealed deep within the layers of Arctic ice. So the Arctic region has vast amounts of permafrost, permanently frozen soil, and permafrost is thawing, so I guess it's not permanently frozen then, which is exposing organic matter that's been frozen for thousands of years, like dead plants and animals, like the eerily well-preserved yucca mammoth found in Siberia back in 2010, for example. And when permafrost thaws, the previously frozen organic matter becomes available to bacteria, which then break it down, releasing methane. Is also released from the seafloor in some Arctic areas through seeps. These seeps can be natural, but things like oil drilling can also release methane, and a lot of scientists are concerned about this because excessive amounts of methane ain't great for the environment. In 1739, a strange bronze object was discovered near the town of Aston in England. It had 12 flat faces, each a perfect pentagon, with a hole in the center of every face. Small knobs protruded from every corner. This object became known as a Roman dodecahedron. Since then, over 120 of these objects have been found across Europe. They date back to the Roman Empire. Every single one is slightly different. No ancient text references them. No inscriptions explain them. No Roman writing writer ever mentions their purpose. Museums will display them, but here's the catch. They refuse to label them with a definitive explanation. Some archaeologists believe they were used for surveying or measuring distance. Others think they were knitting tools, military rangefinders, candle holders, or religious objects of some kind. None of these theories can be proven fully, though. Experiments fail to produce consistent results. The British Museum and others openly admit they do not know what these were used for. The first time scientists tested this object, they assumed the equipment was malfunctioning. In the city of Delhi, India, stands a massive iron pillar over 23 feet tall and weighing more than 6 tons. It was erected around the year 400 CE, during the reign of Chandragupta II. What makes it extraordinary is not its size, it's the condition. The pillar has stood outdoors for over 1,600 years, through monsoons, extreme heat and pollution, and centuries of exposure, but it's barely rusted. Modern metallurgical analysis revealed something deeply uncomfortable. Iron contains an unusually high phosphorus content, almost no sulfur or manganese. This composition creates a passive protective film that prevents corrosion. The problem is this: producing iron at this purity level requires precise temperature control and advanced forging techniques that historians insist did not exist at that time. Museums and textbooks accept the pillar exists, but they refuse to describe it as evidence of advanced ancient technology. Instead, it is framed as this lucky accident or a one-time fluke. Despite decades of study, no ancient text explains how this thing was actually made. No tools have been found that could replicate it using known methods. Modern engineers still struggle to recreate the same corrosion resistance without industrial processes. In 1912, archaeologists excavating burial mounds near Lake Delavan in Wisconsin uncovered several human skeletons. Multiple skeletons measured between 7 and 8 feet tall. Their skulls had unusual proportions, including elongated craniums and double rows of teeth. These were not amateur diggers either. These were professional archaeologists working with the Beloit College Museum. Newspapers across the United States reported this discovery. Photographs were taken, measurements were recorded. Then the remains were sent to museums, and they disappeared after that. The Smithsonian Institution is denied possessing any such skeletons. Beloit College claims records were lost. No bones remain on display. No formal explanation was ever released. The existence of the skeletons is undeniable, though. The rejection lies in what they would imply about human history. In 1936, a couple walking near London, Texas, discovered a hammer partially embedded in limestone rock. The rock surrounding it was estimated to be over 100 million years old. The hammer itself was made of iron that was 96.6% pure. This level of purity is difficult to achieve, even with modern metallurgy. The hammer was examined by metallurgists. The wood handle was partially coalified, meaning it had begun turning into coal. Museums refused to accept this object as ancient. Instead, they claim the rock formed around a modern hammer due to mineral accretion. However, this explanation fails to account for the metal composition or the coalification of the handle. The hammer exists today in private collections. Museums will not display it, not because it's fake, but because it disrupts established timelines. When miners uncovered this fossil, scientists immediately said it was impossible. In 1899, a human finger bone was discovered embedded inside a solid coal seam in Oklahoma. Coal layer was dated to the Carboniferous period, around 300 million years ago. Coal does not form quickly. It requires immense pressure over vast periods of time. Anything embedded within it should be just as old. Bone was examined and confirmed to be anatomically human, not a primate, not an animal, a human finger. Museums rejected the find outright. They did not attempt to prove it was fake. They simply declared it intrusive, meaning it somehow worked its way into the coal long after formation. The problem is there was no fracture line, no surrounding disturbance. The coal seam was intact. Rather than investigate further, institutions archived the report and excluded it from official records. In the late 1800s, a crystal skull surfaced in Paris. It was carved from a single piece of quartz with extreme precision. The most famous skull, known as the Mitchell-Hedges skull, was later discovered in Central America. Quartz is one of the hardest materials materials to carve. Experts estimate it would take years using modern tools. Museums initially accepted the skulls as ancient artifacts, but then in the 1960s they quietly reversed course. Instead of proving they were modern fakes, museums simply refused to display them. Testing produced conflicting results. Some showed tool marks, others didn't. Today, museums classify them as unverified and avoid the topic pretty much altogether. The skulls remain real objects with no agreed explanation.
If you ever find a tent ripped open from the inside on a frozen mountainside, you are not looking at a camping accident. You are looking at panic. In February 1959, 9 experienced Soviet hikers went deep into the northern Ural Mountains, an area that is brutally remote even today. They pitched their tent on a slope, and at some point in the middle of the night, something happened that made them do the unthinkable. Instead of calmly exiting, they cut their way through the fabric and fled into the darkness, underdressed for extreme cold. Searchers later found the abandoned camp, and then the hikers scattered down slope in different locations. The original Soviet investigation used a phrase that has haunted this case for decades, saying an unknown, quote, compelling natural force was responsible. For years, theories got weird fast. Everything from secret tests to creatures to glowing lights. But in 2020, Russian prosecutors publicly concluded the most likely cause was an avalanche. Then, in 2021, researchers published a detailed snow slab avalanche model showing how a delayed slide could damage the tent and create a chain of reaction of fear and desperate decisions. In other words, it is possible the hikers were not running from a monster, they were running from the mountain itself, convinced the slope was about to come down again. The disturbing part is not just what happened, it is how human brains behave when the environment turns hostile. They made one panicked choice and then another until there was no path back to safety. Imagine hiking to a high-altitude lake so remote that it is frozen most of the year. Then, during a short melt season, the ice pulls back like a curtain and reveals what is underneath. Rupkund Lake sits high in the Indian Himalayas, thousands of meters above sea level. For decades, it has been nicknamed Skeleton Lake because human remains are scattered along the shore and sometimes visible in the shallow water. In 1942, the discovery was re-highlighted and reported during the British era, and early fears even included wartime paranoia. But the truth was older and stranger than that. For a long time, the popular explanation was that a single group died there in one catastrophe, maybe a brutal storm. But in 2019, a major ancient DNA study analyzed remains from 38 individuals and found something that makes the place even more unsettling. The people did not all come from one group, and they did not all die at the same time. The study found multiple distinct ancestry groups and evidence pointing to deaths separated by roughly 1,000 years. So Rupkund is not just one tragedy. It is a location where tragedies repeated in different eras involving different people, all ending in the same remote bowl of rock and ice. When you realize that, the lake stops feeling like a mystery with one answer. It starts feeling like a warning sign that kept getting ignored century after century. The hikers thought they found a modern body, then the ice started giving up his secrets. In September 1991, 2 hikers in the Ötztal Alps near the Austria-Italy border spotted a human body emerging from melting ice. At first, people assumed it was a recent death in the mountains, but scientists soon realized that this man had been preserved for more than 5,000 years. He became known as Otzi, and what made him so disturbing was how complete the scene felt. He was not just bones. He had skin, gear, clothing, tools, and even traces of his last meals. It was like the mountain had pressed pause on a moment in prehistory. And then came the twist. Imaging later revealed a flint arrowhead lodged in his left shoulder and an entry wound in his back. Researchers concluded he was attacked and likely died from that injury. In other words, the ice did not just preserve a person, it preserved violence from the Copper Age. If a ship disappears at sea, the ocean can hide it forever, unless the Arctic decides to give it back. In 1845, Sir John Franklin led a British expedition with 2 ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, trying to chart the Northwest passage. The expedition vanished into the Canadian Arctic, and for years there were rumors and fragmented reports, including Inuit oral testimony describing what happened to the crew. Over time, searchers found hard evidence, including a note left on King William Island describing the ships trapped in ice and the crew abandoning them. Archaeology and forensic work later supported the grim reality that no one made it out. Then, in the modern era, the Arctic delivered one of the most jaw-dropping updates in exploration history. Parks Canada confirmed HMS Erebus was found in 2014. HMS Terror was found in 2016. The wrecks were not just historic artifacts, they were time capsules sealed under freezing water. What makes this discovery disturbing is the scale and the slow-motion nature of it. A whole expedition, 129 men, swallowed by ice and then slowly, piece by piece, revealed again more than a century later. This one starts like a treasure story and ends like a technological horror story. Around 1900, sponge divers working off the Greek island of Antikythera found an ancient shipwreck in deep water. Divers brought up statues, coins, and other artifacts, but mixed into the hull was a corroded lump of bronze that looked like trash, except it was not trash. That lump turned out to be the Antikythera mechanism, an ancient geared device that researchers now describe as an advanced astronomical calculator. It is often called the earliest known analog computer because of its complex gear system and what it could predict, like cycles of celestial motion and eclipses. The disturbing feeling here is not gore or tragedy, it is just timeline shock. When you understand how sophisticated the mechanism was, you immediately ask, wait, what else did ancient engineers know that never survived? And why did this level of precision vanish for so long? And remember, this device was found in a shipwreck in a remote underwater graveyard, meaning it was lost in transit. It was never meant to be buried at sea for 2,000 years. History just got unlucky.
Number 5, more sea snakes. Coming from Patrick667 about a year ago as well, they posted, so 3 days ago I went snorkeling off Mimba Island in Zanzibar. Everything went normal and we started heading back, so I grabbed my net and I put my black fins, my black mask, snorkel, and black wetsuit inside. Once back ashore, I grab my bag, jump off the boat, and head to the rental office to return said equipment. At that point, I feel my bag is moving somehow. At first look, it seemed like a flat black worm squirming quickly. After rotating the bag, I realized I was looking at only the tail of a 1 meter long black sea snake, one of the most venomous reptiles ever, trying to get out of the net. Like in the lobby. How it got there, I have no freaking clue. That is a nightmare scenario. Imagine being like, thanks so much, I had a great time. Here's a sand dollar. Also, don't mind the venomous snake. Number 4, the frilled shark. Back in 2004, marine biologists discovered this dinosaur, the frilled shark, just hanging out, just lurking about 870 meters below the surface. So if you're anywhere around there, watch out. This one looks like an eel almost. It's so scary looking, it's so slippery and quick. Frilled sharks can grow up to 7 feet long and they fight in the dark. They don't need to see to attack you, which is pretty terrifying considering all these deep dive stories are all in the pitch black. So unless you're a deep diver, you're not really gonna run into the frilled shark. Have you ever dealt with one of these? Are you a diver? Are you watching this because you're a diver? Please comment down below if you are. Comment some of your personal experiences. These were a nightmare to read. I couldn't even finish half of them. Everything is so dangerous and so fast underwater. Number 3, snapping shrimp. This little guy can literally create a sonic boom as it attacks you. That's how fast it is. You won't see him coming, and neither did this diver. Here's a clip of a mantis shrimp punching through a diver's gear. Yeah, right through their water shoes. Bam!
Ah! Ow! That really hurt.
They're so quick. Oh my god, they're tiny, but they really hit. They're often found in coral reefs, oyster reefs. These little guys, these pistol shrimp, they hit their prey at 100 kilometers per hour. And in doing so, a large air bubble is created, and because this, Mike Tyson shrimp is so quick with the left hook, the following pop is around 200 decibels. The sound alone can stun its prey, and if they're lucky, it sometimes kills them. That's how you want to go out. You don't want to go out with one of these Superman punches to the neck. Number 2, comb stars. Ocean life is by far the scariest thing out there. We have no idea what's in our oceans. We discover some crazy shit every year. Some deep sea fish with bioluminescence are for sure aliens, while others are just natural predators that look scary. Like the comb star, for example. This guy was not in Finding Nemo. He would have been a weird addition. A comb star is a starfish that contains tetrodotoxin, which is this deadly neurotoxin that can cause paralysis. Yeah, Finding Nemo, that movie would be over in 8 minutes if this guy was there. Per every gram of comb star flesh, there's enough toxin to take out 500 mice. So if you have a mice problem, Honestly, you can call one guy. It's a very specific weird call, but I know how you can do it. A little bit of tetrodotoxin. Tetrodotoxin? Tetrodotoxin. That's what it's called. And finally, coming in at number 1, the electric eel. Awesome. That's the worst thing I've ever seen. Great. The moray eel, first of all, don't do what he just did. Don't go up to a random eel and start rubbing it like it's a genie lamp. That's not smart. It's not a Great Dane. You don't want to do that. That was the moray eel. That one can bite your fingers off in like 2 seconds. But you should never touch an eel in the first place because a lot of them are electric. Yeah, just like that MGMT song that's now stuck in our heads. As its name suggests, there's types of eels that can mess you up even if you were to get the first hit. Specifically, the newly discovered 2.5 meter Electrophorus volti, appropriately named after Alessandro Volta, aka the guy who invented the battery. This eel can release a shock up to 860 volts, which is more than 7 times the voltage of a wall plug. A swimming wall plug that gets hungry. Nice. We love nature. I'm never swimming again.
While exploring the Saqqara archaeological site in Egypt this year, a team of Egyptian and Japanese archaeologists made an unexpected find. They were digging in an area they'd previously discovered ancient graves at, but this time they came across a well. What they thought was a well, anyway. Turns out it was the entrance to a forgotten tomb. The well was actually a vertical shaft leading down to a burial chamber, and as they kept digging, they uncovered 4 tombs, some made of mud bricks, others carved right into the rock. The tombs date back more than 4,600 years to ancient Egypt. The team also found 10 more burials from 3,200 years ago, showing that Saqqara was used as a cemetery for well over 1,000 years. They also worked on cleaning a Greco-Roman catacomb, where they found mummified remains, ancient artifacts like ceramics, bird cages, and drinking glasses. The team is planning to return for more digs to see what else might be hidden beneath the sands of Saqqara, but if you're a superstitious type, you might find this one kind of eerie because you know what happens when ancient Egyptian tombs are unearthed, you know? Just last month, news came out about a group of church officials and museum staff in Lithuania who discovered royal treasures that had been hidden for over 85 years. The story actually starts way back in World War II, when caretakers of Vilnius Cathedral decided to hide the cathedral's priceless treasures for safekeeping. Their hiding spot clearly worked, maybe a little too well, because the treasure sat hidden decades after the war. Well, last fall, a team decided to give it another shot. They'd tried everything before: metal detecting, radar, thermal imaging, but they were never able to find anything. This time though, they used a tiny camera on a thin wire and poked it into cracks in the basement of the cathedral. At first, nothing showed up. Then suddenly, something caught their eye on the screen. They carefully opened the cavity, and there it was, the long-lost treasure. All they needed to do is stick a camera on a little wire. All that other stuff was so high-tech. Then this worked. I love that. Among the finds were royal burial items, some more than 450 years old. The treasure included 3 crowns, a scepter, an orb, jewelry, silver plaques, and a medallion. One of the crowns belonged to Alexander Jagiellon, the Grand Duke of Lithuania and King of Poland, who died in 1506, and 2 others belonged to the wives of King Sigismund II Augustus, who passed away in 1572. News of this story has been making the rounds recently. Archaeologists working in Italy discovered this long-lost Roman town hidden beneath farmland. Incredible. The site in the Lazio region dates back to around the 1st century BCE, and it's pretty well preserved. Researchers found entire buildings, including homes and workshops, with walls still standing and even some floor mosaics intact. And then there were the artifacts. You got pottery, coins, and tools. The town was a busy spot for trade. It was probably connected to a bunch of other Roman towns, all working together to supply bigger cities like Rome with what they needed. The find could help scholars understand how smaller towns in the Roman Empire functioned and interacted with one another. We've uncovered a lot about more famous cities like Rome and Pompeii, so discovering more about a smaller, lesser-known town like this is pretty cool. Researchers have recently deciphered these ancient Babylonian tablets, more than 2,500 years old, that mention lunar eclipses as omens. To these ancient people, an eclipse was seen as an ominous sign, often bad news for the kingdom. One tablet specifically mentions a lunar eclipse as a warning that the king could be in danger, or that disaster might befall the kingdom. They believed the moon had an influence on world events, from the fate of kings to outcomes of wars, which isn't all that surprising. I mean, imagine looking up at the sky 2,500 years ago and seeing a big shadow swallow the moon. I mean, what are you supposed to think? That good things are about to happen? The tablets were written in cuneiform script, the oldest known form of writing, and not easy to decipher. But it's clear that the Babylonians knew a lot about astronomy, even though their interpretation of it was a bit off. In 2025, archaeologists in Peru discovered this hidden network of ancient Inca tunnels beneath the ground. These tunnels were used for water management and transportation, and they'd been surprisingly well preserved over the centuries. What's so important about this find is that it shows just how skilled the Inca were at engineering in a tough environment. Without modern tools, they dug these tunnels to direct water through the mountains, helping to irrigate crops during dry seasons. Some of the tunnels also worked as roads, allowing people and goods to move across the rough terrain. The Inca are already famous for their impressive structures like Machu Picchu. These tunnels are revealing another side to them. They were able to manage water and create infrastructure that kept their empire running smoothly, even in some of the most difficult conditions.
Kicking off the list at number 10, let's dive in. Barracuda. Exploring the deep is dangerous if you're a diver, of course, not because of the deadly ocean life surrounding your every direction, but because if you come up too quickly, major health problems will follow. But if not that, probably a deadly barracuda, equally as scary. This deep discovery was made by user Arira95. I'm pulling real events for this one from real deep sea divers. We're going to the real content for this one, so buckle up. One time when my parents visited Mexico, they went diving and my mom was slightly lower than my dad looking at the ocean floor. My mom had on a gold necklace that was floating in the water around her, and it was a sunny day and a fairly shallow dive at this point, so it was sparkling. My mom looked below at all the critters when my dad grabbed her and started frantically shaking her arm to get her attention. I'm sweating reading this. She looked up and a barracuda was directly in front of her, staring intently at that shiny necklace. She slowly moved up her hand to cover the necklace, and they slowly and calmly moved away from it, and it took off without bothering them anymore. But still pretty unsettling, and taught my mom to be a little more aware of her surroundings when she's diving. I mean, fair, but I mean, no one expects a barracuda. Also, if your mom wants to dive with chains on, that's pretty sick. You won't catch her slacking. Even in the depths of the sea, she's like, I'm ready. I don't care who shows up. I don't care who I bump into. Water shoes and bling. Check and check. Let's go diving. Number 9, venomous sea snakes. Last year in the deep waters off Australia's coast, of course it's Australia, always Australia, a sea snake that was once thought to be extinct has been rediscovered. How fun. He's like, psych, you thought. Just when you thought the ocean couldn't get even more dangerous, now we got new sea snakes to worry about. The short-nosed sea snake hasn't been seen in 23 years, and they would often live near Ashmore Reef. But last year, divers found one 67 meters below the surface in the Twilight Zone, which is pretty wild. Just lurking in the dark, just hanging out, meditating. The Australian Institute of Marine Science is responsible for this discovery, and the team calls this a second chance to protect and further understand the species. And an up-close personal encounter is brought to life from this diver. Apparently, this happens from time to time before major storms. Snakes can sense an oncoming storm, so what they try and do is latch onto something heading in the direction towards shore, so they don't have to burn energy and they can just grab onto like a barrel or something and then just, make its way there. Pretty smart. So this diver was exploring, nothing was going crazy or anything like that, and then he felt a snake wrap onto his leg because he felt a storm was coming in. The diver didn't even know that a storm was coming. The snake did, and he wrapped its snake self around his leg. As soon as I was in the shallows, it uncurled and headed up the beach where it hid under a breadfruit tree. That was from a diver named Specialist Celery. Great name, also terrifying experience. I don't like snakes in water or on land. Next, number 8, surprise tiger shark. Yeah, not something you want to see diving in the deep. A tiger shark. A glowing shark, left shark, I don't care. I want none of the shark smoke. This deep sea discovery comes from user Stormcutter. Sick name, a little bit better of a diver name. They say, I know a guy who was out diving for crayfish and lobster by the ocean. Also, the I know a guy trick, it was totally you. Don't lie to us. Crayfish often hide under the rocks, so as he was diving, a tiger shark emerged from a cave and rammed him, breaking his arm and ribs. This guy got shucked by a shark. That's insane. He said the shark was testing him out. Yeah, I'd say. That's pretty sweet, man. I'm glad you survived, honestly. I bet you couldn't wait to tell people what happened. You're like, oh, my ribs? Yeah, I got sideswiped by a tiger shark. Yeah, he's feeling testy. You know how tiger sharks do. If you're wondering what that experience may have looked like, this is footage of a rare tiger shark in New Zealand, lurking in the deep. Number 7, humpback mammoth. This deep dive happened about a year ago. A diver named Sidetrack38, that's their username, not their legal name, although that would be pretty sweet. Sidetrack38, he's like, what's up? They were exploring the ocean one afternoon when all of a sudden they got charged by a mother humpback whale. The divers shared their experience online, saying, her curious calf had swum around us and we were between her and the calf. 2 of us never even saw her coming. We were watching the baby, but our 3rd diver saw her come. She kicked down and swam under us last minute. We didn't see anything until that 60-foot freight train passed just underneath us. Whales are beautiful. They're beautiful but terrifying creatures, my friend. Glad you didn't get a broken rib or back in this case, because whales, they like to go pretty deep.
Just a view.
Just trying to figure us out.
Incredible.
Yeah, this is amazing.
Justin, you want the overheads off?
Look at that view. I hope we're getting screen captures of this.
Number 6, mako shark. Mako sharks are one of the fastest sharks in the world. I'll start by saying that. Just get that fact in your head. Given this list so far, I would also start sweating if I were you. This is a scary one. This deep dive horror story comes from username One Dumb Diver. Great name. They clearly made this account just to share this occasion, so let's dive in. Nowadays, we dive with shark shields, which emit electronic pulses that freak the sharks out and keep them away. But back then, what we used was essentially a chainmail sleeve. The idea being that sharks hate the taste of metal, so if you give it your arm, it'll bite down, decide you're gross, and then move along. So I wait, it comes over, and I make a perfect move to give it my arm. However, just before the crunch, it occurred to me that I had left my sleeve on my bed. Now I had a huge open, gashing wound on my arm from the bite in open water, and I trailed blood everywhere. Not an ideal scenario. So once the shock finally wore off, you realize that you're in salt water, and salt and open wounds, they don't feel good. In a panic, I dropped my weight belt and shot up to the surface without any sort of waiting period. Not great. Because I hadn't been paying attention to the currents, I was approximately a quarter mile downstream of my boat, which meant that I had to swim back up to it. After getting bitten by a shark, imagine having to swim, that is a nightmare scenario. Glad you're okay. Also, you're not a dumb diver, you're experiencing the things. You're figuring it out. You're doing great. You're brave. I don't even like going in lakes.